September 11th, 2001, began as a calm, late summer morning in the United States, the kind of day that felt completely ordinary and predictable. The sky over New York City was bright and clear, a deep blue without clouds, and the air carried the familiar sounds of traffic, subway trains, and thousands of people moving through their daily routines. Office workers hurried toward buildings with coffee in hand, tourists lined up for early visits to famous landmarks, and vendors prepared for another busy day in one of the most active cities in the world. Nothing in those first quiet hours hinted that this peaceful morning would soon turn into one of the darkest days in modern history. At the heart of Lower Manhattan stood the World Trade Center, a complex of 7 buildings that symbolized global business and American economic power. The most recognizable structures were the Twin Towers, each rising 110 stories into the sky. Every day, around 50,000 people worked in the towers, and thousands more visited for meetings, restaurants, and the famous observation deck at the top. Elevators moved constantly, phones rang in busy offices, and conversations about deals, deadlines, and daily plans filled the air. For the people inside, it was simply another Tuesday filled with normal concerns. Emails to answer, meetings to attend, and projects to complete. At 8:46 a.m., that normalcy shattered. American Airlines Flight 11, a passenger plane that had been hijacked shortly after takeoff, crashed into the North Tower between the 93rd and 99th floors. The impact was violent and sudden. Hundreds of people were killed instantly, and jet fuel ignited massive fires that began spreading through multiple floors. Those on lower levels felt the building shake as if from an explosion or earthquake. Papers fluttered through the air outside, and thick black smoke poured from the upper floors, visible from miles away. At first, confusion dominated. Many people thought a small plane had accidentally hit the building. News channels began reporting a tragic accident, speculating about pilot error or mechanical failure. But inside the tower, the situation was terrifyingly real. Stairwells filled with people trying to escape, some injured, others helping coworkers who could barely walk. Smoke made breathing difficult in certain areas, and alarms echoed through hallways. Emergency announcements told people to remain calm, yet the scale of the damage was beyond anything the building's occupants had ever imagined. Firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical teams responded within minutes. In one of the most courageous displays of duty ever witnessed, first responders rushed toward the burning skyscraper, while thousands of civilians were trying to flee. Firefighters began climbing the stairs in heavy gear, carrying hoses and equipment, knowing the higher they went, the more dangerous it would become. Police officers organized evacuations and directed people away from falling debris. Ambulances lined the streets, and hospitals across the city prepared for mass casualties. Then, at 9:03 a.m., the world realized this was no accident. United Airlines Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower in a fiery explosion, live on television, as millions watched in disbelief. The second impact confirmed that the United States was under a coordinated terrorist attack. Gasps and screams filled news studios. Reporters struggled to find words. In homes, offices, and schools across the globe, people stared at their screens, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The image of 2 burning towers against the clear blue sky became one of the most unforgettable visuals in history. Inside the South Tower, the situation turned instantly catastrophic. Floors near the impact zone were destroyed, and stairwells were cut off for many above the crash site. People trapped on higher floors searched desperately for ways to signal for help, some waving cloths from windows. Others made heartbreaking phone calls to family members, leaving final messages filled with love, fear, and disbelief. These personal moments, later shared by relatives, revealed the human side of the tragedy. Ordinary people facing unimaginable circumstances with courage and dignity. The streets below were scenes of chaos and bravery mixed together. Debris rained down, forcing people to run for cover. Yet amid the fear, strangers helped one another. Some carried injured people on their backs, others offered water, comfort, or directions. Office workers covered in dust walked north in silence, shock written on their faces. The scale of the disaster overwhelmed even New York City, a place known for handling crises. Air traffic controllers across the country began grounding flights as officials realized more planes might be hijacked. The idea that commercial airplanes, symbols of travel and connection, had been turned into weapons was horrifying. The attacks exposed a vulnerability that few had considered before. Security measures that once seemed sufficient suddenly appeared inadequate in the face of such planning and determination. For those watching from other countries, the sense of disbelief was just as strong. Leaders worldwide expressed sympathy and solidarity, recognizing that this was not only an attack on a nation but on civilians from many backgrounds and nationalities. Workers from over 90 countries were in the World Trade Center that morning, making the tragedy truly global. Time seemed to move strangely that morning, both too fast and painfully slow. Every minute brought new images of smoke, fire, and desperate rescue efforts. Reporters struggled to confirm information while rumors spread quickly. Families tried to reach loved ones by phone, often without success. The emotional weight grew heavier with each passing moment. What stood out even in those early hours was the courage shown by so many. Firefighters climbing higher despite exhaustion, police officers re-entering dangerous areas, and office workers guiding strangers to safety all demonstrated extraordinary humanity. These acts did not erase the horror, but they showed the strength of people when faced with disaster. By mid-morning, it was clear that the day had already changed the world. The attacks shattered a sense of security many had taken for granted. The images of the burning towers, the company, infusion, and the bravery became etched into global memory. September 11th was no longer just a date on a calendar. It had become a symbol of loss, resilience, and a turning point in history, whose effects would be felt for decades to come. As the crisis in New York unfolded and the world's attention focused on the burning towers, the scale of the attack was still not fully understood. Many believed the worst had already happened, but in reality, the operation was still in motion. The morning air over the eastern United States carried an invisible tension as aviation authorities and military officials struggled to piece together scattered information. Reports of hijackings, lost radio contact, and unusual flight paths created a confusing and alarming picture. Within this uncertainty, another devastating strike was about to occur. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 that had departed from Washington Dulles International Airport bound for Los Angeles, crashed into the western side of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The Pentagon, one of the largest office buildings in the world, serves as the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense. Thousands of military personnel and civilians worked there, engaged in planning, administration, and national security operations. The impact tore through several rings of the building, causing a massive explosion and intense fires that filled corridors with smoke and debris. Employees inside the Pentagon described a powerful shockwave that knocked people off their feet. Ceiling tiles collapsed, lights went out, and thick smoke quickly spread through the damaged sections. Those near the impact zone faced chaos, trying to find exits through dark, smoke-filled hallways. Some crawled on the floor to avoid inhaling toxic fumes. Others helped injured co-workers, lifting debris and guiding them towards safety. Emergency responders, already on high alert due to the events in New York, rushed to the scene, confronting flames and structural damage while searching for survivors. The strike on the Pentagon demonstrated that the attacks were not limited to symbolic financial targets, but also aimed at the military heart of the United States. It intensified fear and uncertainty across the country. Government buildings in Washington, D.C. were evacuated. Fighter jets began patrolling the skies over major cities. For the first time in history, U.S. airspace was gradually shut down, with the Federal Aviation Administration ordering all civilian aircraft to land as quickly as possible. Airports across the nation turned into scenes of confusion as passengers were stranded, unsure of what was happening. Meanwhile, another plane was in the air, United Airlines Flight 93. It had taken off from Newark, New Jersey, heading to San Francisco. Unlike the other flights, it was delayed before departure, a factor that would later prove significant. The hijackers aboard Flight 93 took control after learning that their plan was already being exposed by news reports and phone calls from other aircraft. Passengers began making calls to family members and authorities using airphones and cell phones, discovering that planes had already struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. These calls changed everything. Realizing their aircraft was part of the same plot, the passengers and crew understood that they were unlikely to survive if the hijackers reached their intended destination. Though exact details remain known only from recordings and accounts, it is clear that a group of passengers decided to act. Their decision required extraordinary courage, unarmed civilians choosing to confront attackers in a confined space at thousands of feet in the air. They spoke to loved ones one last time, expressing love and determination, before attempting to retake control of the plane. Voices captured on cockpit recordings later revealed sounds of struggle as passengers fought the hijackers. The plane's flight path became erratic, with sharp turns and changes in altitude. At 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. All 44 people on board died, including the hijackers, but their resistance likely prevented the aircraft from reaching its intended target. Investigators believe that the target may have been either the U.S. Capitol or the White House, both symbols of American government. The passengers' actions are widely remembered as an act of heroism that saved many lives. Across the nation, information traveled quickly but unevenly. News anchors spoke in urgent tones, often correcting earlier reports as facts became clearer. People in offices gathered around televisions. Schools locked their doors. Parents rushed to pick up children. The idea that coordinated teams had turned ordinary passenger flights into weapons was almost impossible to grasp. For many, the feeling was not just fear, but deep shock, a sense that the world they knew had changed in a single morning. In New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania, emergency systems were pushed to their limits. Hospitals activated disaster plans, preparing for waves of injured patients. Blood donation centers quickly filled with volunteers, many of whom stood in line for hours. Citizens across the country looked for ways to help, even if they were far from the attack sites. Flags appeared on homes and cars as symbols of unity and resilience. Investigations soon identified the attackers as members of the extremist organization Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. The group had planned the operation in secrecy, training hijackers to fly planes and exploiting weaknesses in airport security at the time. The realization that such an elaborate plot had been carried out within the United States raised urgent questions about intelligence, preparedness, and global terrorism. The human stories from this part of the tragedy were deeply moving. Pentagon employees who escaped returned later to help colleagues. First responders entered burning sections of the building despite the risk of collapse. Families of passengers on Flight 93 later spoke about the bravery of their loved ones, finding some comfort in knowing their actions made a difference. These personal narratives revealed not only the cruelty of the attacks, but also the strength of ordinary people under extraordinary pressure. As the morning progressed, the sense of national emergency deepened. Government leaders were moved to secure locations. Military readiness levels increased. The uncertainty about whether more attacks might follow created widespread anxiety. Yet amid the fear, there was also a powerful sense of solidarity. Messages of support came from countries around the world, recognizing that the victims included people of many nationalities and backgrounds. By late morning, it was clear that the attacks were part of a coordinated effort to cause maximum destruction, fear, and symbolic damage. The events at the Pentagon and in the Pennsylvania field showed that the tragedy extended far beyond New York City. Together, these attacks formed a single, devastating narrative that would reshape global politics, security policies, and public consciousness for years to come. The memory of that expanding horror, the realization that multiple planes, cities, and targets were involved, remains one of the most haunting aspects of the day. It was not just the scale of destruction, but the understanding that ordinary routines could be shattered so suddenly. Yet alongside that darkness stood examples of remarkable courage. First responders running toward danger, passengers choosing resistance over helplessness, and strangers helping strangers. These moments of humanity became part of the legacy of that morning, reminding the world that even in the face of terror, compassion and bravery endure. The destruction of the World Trade Center towers became one of the most haunting and unforgettable moments of that day, an event witnessed in real time by millions of people around the world. After the planes struck, fires burned fiercely inside both buildings. Jet fuel had ignited instantly on impact, but it was the office contents, furniture, paper, carpets, plastics, and electronics that kept the fires raging. Thick smoke poured out of shattered windows, turning the bright morning sky into a scene of black and gray clouds. Inside, heat built up to extreme levels, weakening the steel structures that held the towers upright. For those trapped above the impact zones, conditions grew worse with every passing minute. Stairwells in the affected areas were destroyed or blocked, cutting off escape routes. Smoke seeped into hallways and offices, making breathing painful and visibility poor. Some people tried to move downward but found paths impassable. Others gathered in rooms hoping for rescue, using phones to call loved ones or emergency services. Their voices, recorded in final messages, carried fear but also love and concern for those they might never see again. Below the impact zones, thousands of people descended the stairs in long, slow lines. Emergency lighting flickered. The smell of smoke filled the air. Firefighters climbing upward past civilians moving down, offering encouragement despite knowing the danger ahead. Many survivors later remembered the calm professionalism of these responders, who continued upward floor after floor with heavy gear, determined to save as many lives as possible. It was a race against time, though few realized just how little time remained. Outside, the streets of Lower Manhattan were filled with debris and confusion. Glass, metal fragments, and paper covered the ground. Police officers and volunteers tried to establish safe zones, directing crowds away from the towers. Yet many people stopped to look back in disbelief at the burning skyscrapers. News helicopters circled above, broadcasting images that stunned viewers worldwide. The idea that such massive modern buildings could be brought down seemed impossible to comprehend. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. The top of the building began to tilt, and then, in a matter of seconds, the entire structure came down in a massive roar. Floors pancaked onto one another as the weakened steel gave way. A huge cloud of dust and debris surged outward, racing through the streets like a storm. People ran desperately, trying to outrun the choking gray wave. The sound was described as a deep, rolling thunder, mixed with the crash of concrete and steel. For many watching, the collapse felt unreal, like a scene from a disaster film. Yet it was happening in the heart of a real city, to real people. The South Tower had stood for decades as a symbol of modern engineering and global commerce. Its sudden disappearance left a gap in the skyline and in the hearts of those who lived and worked nearby. The North Tower continued to burn for nearly half an hour longer. Rescue efforts intensified, though conditions were extremely dangerous. Firefighters inside struggled with failing communications and limited information about the structural damage. Many were still ascending the stairs, hoping to reach survivors. Outside, commanders attempted to coordinate operations amid the noise and chaos. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower also collapsed. Like the first, it fell in a violent cascade, sending another enormous cloud of dust across Manhattan. The collapse destroyed nearby buildings, vehicles, and infrastructure. Streets were buried under layers of ash and debris. Daylight turned to darkness for blocks around. People who had been helping the injured were suddenly running again, seeking shelter from the suffocating cloud. The area where the towers had stood became known as Ground Zero. It was a scene of devastation. Twisted steel beams, broken concrete, and burning wreckage spread across acres. Fires continued to burn for weeks beneath the debris. The collapse had claimed not only office workers and visitors, but also many first responders who had rushed inside to help. Their sacrifice became one of the most profound symbols of that day. In the hours that followed, rescue operations began on a massive scale. Firefighters, police officers, construction workers, and volunteers searched the rubble for survivors. Heavy equipment was brought in, but much of the work was done by hand at first, as crews listened for signs of life. The pile was unstable and dangerous, with pockets of fire and shifting debris. Yet the determination to find survivors drove responders to keep going. Hospitals in the city waited for injured victims, though the number of survivors from the collapse zones was heartbreakingly small. Families gathered at hospitals, police stations, and temporary information centers, desperately seeking news. Missing person posters soon appeared everywhere, on walls, bus stops, and fences, showing smiling faces and contact numbers. Each poster represented a life interrupted, a family in uncertainty. The emotional toll spread far beyond New York. Across the United States and around the world, people watched the collapses replayed over and over on television. The images became etched into collective memory. For many, it marked the first time they had seen such destruction unfold live. The sense of vulnerability was profound. If such towers could fall, what else was possible? Yet amid the devastation, stories of survival and bravery emerged. Some people escaped from high floors through damaged stairwells. Others were pulled from the rubble hours later. First responders continued working despite exhaustion, smoke, and grief for lost colleagues. Volunteers brought food and supplies. Strangers comforted one another in the streets and shelters. The collapse of the towers was not only a physical disaster, but also a symbolic one. The World Trade Center had represented global connection and economic strength. Its destruction felt like an attack on ideas as well as lives. The skyline of New York was permanently changed, and so was the sense of security for millions. In the weeks and months that followed, the site remained a focus of recovery and mourning. Memorial services were held, and the names of victims were read aloud. The courage of those who ran toward danger rather than away from it became a lasting part of the story. The collapses, though devastating, revealed the depth of human compassion and resilience in the face of overwhelming tragedy. Even years later, people remember where they were when they saw the towers fall. The sight, the sound, and the feeling of that moment remain vivid. It was a turning point that reshaped history, reminding the world of both the fragility of life and the strength that can emerge in times of crisis. The attacks led to immediate shock, grief, and anger, but they also set in motion political and military decisions that would shape the world for decades. In the hours after the tragedy, leaders in the United States faced enormous pressure to respond. The scale and coordination of the attacks made it clear that this was not the act of a single individual or small group acting alone. Intelligence agencies quickly focused on Al-Qaeda, an extremist network that had previously carried out attacks against American targets and openly expressed hostility toward U.S. influence in the Middle East. Within days, the phrase "war on terror" entered public language. It described a broad and long-term campaign aimed at preventing future terrorist attacks by targeting the groups responsible, their supporters, and the conditions that allowed them to operate. This approach went beyond traditional warfare between nations. Instead, it involved tracking networks that crossed borders, used secret cells, and operated in hidden ways. The challenge was complex and required cooperation between intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and militaries around the world. In October 2001, the United States, supported by Allied forces, launched military operations in Afghanistan. The Taliban government, which controlled much of the country at the time, had provided shelter to Al-Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden. The goal of the operation was to dismantle terrorist training camps, disrupt leadership structures, and remove the Taliban from power if they refused to hand over those responsible. Airstrikes targeted key positions, and ground forces worked with local Afghan groups opposed to the Taliban. At first, the campaign moved quickly. Taliban control weakened, and many Al-Qaeda members fled or went into hiding. However, the conflict did not end. Insurgency, regional instability, and political challenges turned the situation into a long and difficult war. Over the years, international forces remained involved in efforts to stabilize Afghanistan, train local security forces, and support a new government. The length and cost of the war led to debates in many countries about strategy, effectiveness, and the human toll. The response to the attacks was not limited to military action abroad. Inside the United States and in many other nations, security policies changed dramatically. Airports introduced stricter screening procedures. Items once allowed on flights were banned or limited. Passengers became used to longer lines, identification checks, and baggage inspections. The idea of aviation security shifted from convenience to prevention of worst-case scenarios. Governments also passed new laws designed to give authorities broader powers to detect and prevent terrorist activity. In the U.S., legislation expanded surveillance capabilities, allowed greater information sharing between agencies, and increased monitoring of financial transactions suspected of supporting terrorism. Supporters argued that these measures were necessary to stop future attacks. Critics worried about privacy, civil liberties, and the risk of misuse. The balance between security and freedom became a central public debate. International cooperation increased as well. Intelligence agencies from different countries began sharing data more closely, tracking suspects across borders, and coordinating operations. Organizations such as NATO invoked collective defense principles, showing solidarity with the United States. Counterterrorism became a priority topic at global summits and diplomatic meetings. Nations that once worked separately in these areas found themselves linked by a shared sense of vulnerability. At the same time, the global response had complex consequences. Military interventions and security policies sometimes created political tension and controversy. Civilian casualties in conflict zones, the treatment of detainees, and the use of certain interrogation methods sparked strong criticism. Human rights organizations called for accountability and adherence to international law. These debates revealed the difficulty of fighting an enemy that did not wear uniforms or represent a single country. The wars and security measures also influenced public attitudes. Fear of terrorism affected travel, immigration discussions, and perceptions of certain regions and communities. In many places, people of particular backgrounds faced suspicion or discrimination, even when they had no connection to extremism. Leaders and community groups worked to emphasize that terrorism was the act of violent individuals, not entire cultures or religions. Maintaining social unity while addressing security threats became another challenge. Economically, the attacks and subsequent conflicts had wide effects. Governments increased spending on defense, intelligence, and homeland security. Industries related to security technology grew. Travel and tourism, however, suffered immediate declines. Insurance costs rose, and businesses reconsidered emergency planning and risk management. The idea of preparedness for terrorism, disasters, and other threats became a larger part of corporate and public planning. The media played a significant role in shaping understanding of this new era. Continuous news coverage kept people aware of threats, operations, and political debates. While this informed the public, it also contributed to ongoing anxiety. Terms like terror alert levels and homeland security became part of everyday language. The psychological impact of living in a time of perceived constant threat influenced generations. Over the years, major events continued to be linked to the broader struggle that began after the attacks. Operations targeted extremist leaders in various regions. In 2011, Osama bin Laden was located and killed in a U.S. operation in Pakistan, a moment many saw as symbolic justice, though it did not end terrorism as a global issue. New groups emerged in different areas, showing that the problem was evolving rather than disappearing. The long duration of military involvement, especially in Afghanistan, led to reflection about goals and outcomes. Veterans returned home with physical and emotional scars. Families in conflict regions endured displacement and loss. Policymakers faced questions about how to prevent extremism while avoiding endless war. Eventually, shifts in strategy and negotiations led to changes in international presence, but the legacy of those years remains significant. One of the lasting impacts of this period was a deeper awareness of how interconnected the world had become. An attack planned in one region, carried out using global travel systems, and broadcast instantly across media could reshape policies on every continent. Security was no longer seen as purely national. It required international attention and cooperation. Despite the many challenges and controversies, the period also showed examples of resilience and adaptation. Cities improved emergency response systems. Communication between agencies improved. Communities held dialogues aimed at preventing radicalization and promoting understanding. Education and outreach programs sought to address the roots of extremism, such as political instability and lack of opportunity, though solutions proved complex. The global response to the attacks did not follow a single simple path. It involved military action, law enforcement, diplomacy, social change, and ongoing debate. It reshaped borders, alliances, and political priorities. For people who grew up after 2001, many of these security measures and international tensions became part of normal life, even though they began in response to one terrible day. The period that followed demonstrated both the determination of nations to protect their citizens and the difficulty of doing so without creating new problems. It showed how fear can influence decisions, but also how cooperation and resolve can lead to progress. The world that emerged after the attacks was more cautious, more connected in security matters, and more aware of the complex nature of modern threats. The consequences of that turning point continue to influence global politics, security practices, and public conversations, making it one of the most significant eras in recent history. In the years that followed the attacks, remembrance became an important way for people to cope with loss and ensure that the victims would never be forgotten. What had once been a place of towering buildings and busy offices gradually transformed into a space of reflection and tribute. The absence of the Twin Towers created a physical emptiness in the skyline, but it also created a powerful symbol, a reminder of lives cut short and a world changed forever. Every year on September 11th, ceremonies are held to honor those who died. Families of victims gather, along with survivors, first responders, and leaders, to read aloud the names of the nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives. The reading of names is a solemn ritual, often accompanied by moments of silence marking the times when each plane struck and when the towers fell. These ceremonies emphasize that behind the numbers were individuals, parents, children, friends, and co-workers with dreams, routines, and stories. The 9/11 Memorial in New York stands where the Twin Towers once rose. Two enormous reflecting pools occupy the footprints of the original buildings, with water flowing downward into a central void. The design suggests both loss and continuity, water constantly moving, yet never filling the empty space. Around the edges of the pools, bronze panels display the names of the victims. Visitors often trace these names with their fingers, leave flowers, or pause quietly in thought. The memorial creates a place where grief and memory can coexist with the energy of the surrounding city. Nearby, the museum preserves artifacts and personal stories from that day. Twisted steel beams, damaged emergency vehicles, and recovered personal items show the scale of destruction, while recorded testimonies share experiences of survival, courage, and loss. These exhibits aim not only to document history, but also to help future generations understand the human impact of the tragedy. Education programs encourage reflection on tolerance, responsibility, and the consequences of hatred. The spirit of remembrance extends beyond New York. At the Pentagon, a memorial honors those who died in the attack there, with individual benches dedicated to each victim. In Pennsylvania, the Flight 93 National Memorial marks the field where the plane crashed, recognizing the bravery of the passengers and crew. These sites serve as places of learning and quiet respect, connecting visitors to events that might otherwise feel distant in time. Stories of heroism are a central part of the legacy. Firefighters who climbed the stairs of the burning towers, police officers who guided people to safety, medical teams who worked without rest. Their actions showed extraordinary dedication. Many lost their lives while trying to save others. Their sacrifice is remembered not only in monuments, but also in annual runs, scholarships, and community service projects created in their names. These acts of remembrance turn grief into action, helping others while honoring the fallen. Survivors carry memories that shape their lives in profound ways. Some speak about the kindness of strangers who helped them escape. Others recall the silence that followed the collapses, a quiet filled with shock and disbelief. Over time, many survivors have shared their experiences publicly, contributing to a collective understanding of the day. Their voices help humanize history, reminding listeners that the event was not just political or symbolic, but deeply personal. The attacks also led to conversations about resilience. New York City, despite immense loss, rebuilt. The area around Ground Zero eventually saw new construction, including One World Trade Center, which now rises as a symbol of renewal. While nothing can replace what was lost, the rebuilding reflects a determination to continue, to create life and purpose even after tragedy. This balance between remembrance and moving forward is a delicate but essential part of healing. For younger generations who did not witness the attacks firsthand, education plays a key role. Schools teach about the events as part of history, emphasizing both the facts and the human stories. Teachers often encourage discussions about empathy, diversity, and peaceful conflict resolution. In this way, the memory of the tragedy becomes a lesson about the importance of understanding and cooperation in a diverse world. At the same time, the memory of 9/11 can be painful. Anniversaries may bring back strong emotions for families and survivors. Counseling and support networks remain important for those dealing with long-term trauma. The recognition that emotional wounds can last for years has influenced how societies approach mental health after disasters. Art, literature, and film have also explored themes connected to that day: loss, heroism, fear, and hope. These creative works allow people to process complex emotions and keep memories alive in different forms. Music concerts, charity events, and interfaith gatherings often take place on anniversaries, emphasizing unity across cultures and beliefs. One of the lasting lessons many draw from the tragedy is the value of human connection. In the immediate aftermath, people across the world expressed solidarity, sending messages, aid, and prayers. Strangers helped one another without hesitation. That sense of shared humanity stands in contrast to the violence that caused the suffering. Remembering this response can inspire efforts to build bridges rather than divisions. The message of remembrance is not only about looking back, but also about shaping the future. Many initiatives created in memory of victims focus on service, education, and dialogue. Foundations support causes such as disaster relief, youth development, and cross-cultural understanding. By turning memory into positive action, communities seek to honor lives lost through acts that improve the lives of others. As years pass, the way people remember may evolve, but the importance of memory remains. The physical memorials, the annual ceremonies, and the stories passed down all serve to keep the events from fading into abstraction. They remind the world of both the pain inflicted and the strength shown in response. The legacy of that day includes grief, certainly, but also resilience, compassion, and a renewed appreciation for everyday life. Many people who lived through the events speak about valuing time with loved ones more deeply afterward. The awareness that life can change in an instant encourages gratitude and care. Ultimately, remembrance is about dignity, acknowledging the lives lost, respecting the courage shown, and committing to a future where understanding is stronger than hatred. The memory of the attacks continues to shape conversations about peace, responsibility, and humanity. Though the events brought immense sorrow, the way people choose to remember and respond offers a path toward hope and unity, ensuring that even in tragedy, the best qualities of humanity can endure. If you enjoy powerful true stories like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more untold history and reach our goal faster.